Hey everyone, it's Mark Warner here. I'm sorry I'm running a couple minutes late. You would think somebody like me who spent 25 years in the technology business and mostly in cell phones could get myself on my Facebook Live uh, town hall time. So I want to welcome you to this. I don't know what number of these we've done now over the last 2.5 to 3 weeks. I want to start though with a hope that you are all well, that everybody around you is safe. I'm sure, like many of us, are getting a little challenged with the quarantining, um, but we're going to get through this. I know we will. I know Virginia will. I know our country will. But it's going to be a challenge. I think we're really looking at, particularly the next 10 or 12 days, are going to be I think, extraordinarily challenging in Virginia and, for that matter, in the whole country. I think we've got three things all coming at once. One, as we saw the numbers today, another, I think it was 5.6 million people declaring unemployment. We're now up to over 22 million. And in the last few weeks, unprecedented numbers of people being unemployed, enormous amounts of economic insecurity, people questioning whether they can um, pay their rent, not pay their rent, pay their mortgage, not pay their student debt. Enormous stress there. Second level of stress is around what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, and I'm sure there'll be some questions about the CARES Act, which $2.2 trillion dollars is its face price tag. In reality, it's closer to $6.2 trillion dollars because the Federal Reserve is using some of these funds to leverage for additional lending for another $4 trillion dollars. And people will, of course, say, well, that sounds great. When am I getting my money? And I'm sure we'll get into some questions on that subject as well. And then third, we've got the whole challenge around the numbers in Virginia of people getting sick, unfortunately deaths, both nationally and here in Virginia, continuing to go up. Um, all three of those coming together for enormous stress. The first thing I want to address, and I'm sure we'll come back to this a couple times, and then I'll get to a number of your questions and comments, is on two areas that I am particularly frustrated on. One is the fact of why our country has not joined with other industrial nations around the world, Germany, South Korea, Taiwan, and didn't adopt a definitive testing standard as early as January. We are still way behind the rest of much of the world on testing. There's some good news happening in the testing field. More tests are coming on, and I've been very disappointed that there's not been a single federal site where we can find the data on how many tests are being given in every state and every county, what type of tests, what's coming on board soon, what's the capacity. I think the federal government should provide that. I'm now working with Johns Hopkins University, who've created a site that has actually traced the virus over the last month or so, a couple of months. It's become kind of the definitive site there, and they are soon going to announce what I hope will become the same kind of definitive site for testing, because there is some good news coming on testing. And I think it's important for policymakers. I think it's important for fellow Americans to be able to see what's happening in your community, what the test protocols are, and perhaps most importantly, as you hear about all these new tests coming online, when will they be coming to a community near you? So testing is one area that we've got to do a lot more. Another area is PPE. In this area, I think the administration has been a total disaster. The fact that they have, instead of taking the federal powers that were granted to the president under the Defense Production Act and having, in a sense, a common spreadsheet that would show all of the PPE sources around the country or from abroad that are coming into our country, and then allocating them in a rational way. We almost have this Lord of the Flies, dog eat dog kind of approach where it's one state against another, one hospital system against another hospital system. And then we've seen in Virginia certain hospital systems that seem to have gotten some PPE, and we're talking about gloves, masks, gowns, then suddenly have the FEMA swoop in and redirect some of that to other places. If that was being done in a general national plan, maybe that would make some sense. But instead, when it seems to be doing so ad hoc, that is an enormous, enormous challenge. And then finally, before we get to the questions, just want to acknowledge there's been some press about this today. The president did actually ask me last night, contacted my office and asked me last night to be part of a bipartisan group of senators to work on his ideas on reopening the economy. I agreed to participate. I was on a call with the president today, but I'm only going to participate if this is a meaningful way to provide input and if the president moves forward on opening the economy based upon data, science, medical professionals. I can tell you as a former governor, if we open up a community too early and lose the public's trust that people can go out safely, that chance to reopen becomes much, much harder down the line. So I'm anxious to do this. I think even the president may be outlining some of his ideas on this this afternoon in his press conference. I've not seen any of that. I don't know any of the details yet, but I wanted to make sure that folks were aware that I'll be trying to participate as long as it is a data-driven and not political exercise on this venture. Let's get to some of these questions and comments. Nancy from Bocosin asks, what can be done to keep the Postal Service functioning? I strongly support keeping the postal system running. I believe postal officers are frontline responders at this point. They have to be out delivering, coming in contact with the public. There are challenges long-term on the post office, but we need to go ahead and supplement with funding, and we didn't do it in the CARES Act, but we need to supplement with funding the Postal Service in the short term to make sure that that kind of essential mail service is provided. Candidly, I think it was not included because of concerns from the administration. I actually think some of my Republican colleagues were willing to do that, but this is something that we have to address in the next bill. Karen from Norfolk is asking, what is being proposed to help Virginians stay safe and healthy if President Trump prematurely opens up the country? And I think this is going to be where, at the end of the day, I know the president has threatened that he can arbitrarily open up the country at his own wish. That's not the way I read the Constitution, and I don't think that's the way most governors read the Constitution, Democratic or Republican governors. That power is left to the states. It's left to localities. The president never put in place any kind of lockdown order. He's, matter of fact, allowed states to go on their own. So I think it is very important that at the end of the day, yes, we listen to the president, and that's why I've agreed to work with him on his plans to reopen, if it's done in a data-driven way. But I would, at the end of the day, rely upon Governor Northam for Virginia. I'd rely upon your local elected officials because they are ultimately charged with making sure our public safety is maintained. John from Virginia Beach asked, what are we doing about keeping 1099 workers safe during the pandemic and protected? This has been, John, an area that I've been interested in actually since 1915. 2015, sorry. I'm old, but not that old. As the gig companies first started to emerge, when Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and others were starting to come around, I thought, this is a cool thing. All these new gig workers, they're called 1099 independent contractors, but what happens if the stuff hits the fan, which it obviously has now? How do those folks, and it is a large number of Americans, how do we make sure they are protected with unemployment and benefits? So I've had legislation for a number of years around portable benefits. I think its time has come, and I'm happy to say that in the CARES bill, when we expanded the unemployment benefits, we made sure that all workers, 1099ers, freelancers, gig workers, sole proprietors, all qualify for unemployment. And for the next 16 weeks, unemployment that says whatever Virginia would traditionally give you, we will bump up, the federal government will bump up an additional $600 per worker per week for those 16 weeks. The challenge is making sure that money gets out. The challenge is also then trying to make sure that this protection for 1099ers doesn't end with the virus. Norma from Herndon says, I work with a group that makes masks for members of the military and healthcare workers. What's being done to expand protective equipment, PPE for military and others? One, Norma, I'm glad that you do that. This is where I think if we had a national spreadsheet on who is making what around PPE, we'd be better served. I know for example, I've written the head of the VA today because we've got VA hospitals is not directly military, but we've got VA hospitals, and obviously in Port, in Hampton, in Richmond, in Salem, in Southwest Virginia, to make sure that all the folks who work at the VA hospitals get PPE. On the military side, that's going through the DoD, but again, this is an area where there needs to be a stronger chain of command, and I think we're going to get better on this, but in the interim, this has been one of, I think, the biggest failings of our response has been PPE. Let's see here. We've got a number of other folks. Let me scroll down. In the meantime, let me get another one of these pre-asked questions. Norma again said, and her is hashtag masks for humanity. And I would urge Norma also to contact the Secretary of Public Safety in Virginia, Brian Moran. Since we don't have any kind of federal coordinating body, this is something that we are trying to work at the state level, and that's where the state activities. Meg is asking about the financial health licensed massage therapists. And obviously, these are folks that can't socially distance. Many days in this last couple of weeks where I could have used the massage. Pretty stressing times. I would urge Meg, there's two different areas where you can look. One is the expanded unemployment benefits, which I just talked about, and that will be whatever you would normally get. And I know normally massage therapists don't qualify for unemployment. You will now, and you get the $600 a week bump up. But also, what I believe your small business, independent business, you should be able to apply for what's called the PPP program. This is the program that's gotten a lot of attention in the last few weeks. Very successful for businesses under 500 employees, also applies to nonprofits. And the good news is the $349 billion that were in that plan has been fully subscribed. That's good news and bad news. It's obviously very popular. The bad news is twofold. One, that I was concerned because there was not a showing in this program that you have to show financial duress, that there may be businesses that are applying that have great banking relationships because you have to apply to a bank that may not need the money, but are thinking they can apply and get it. And unfortunately, I think some of that is taking place, and we have to crack down on that. The second is Meg, for example, who may not have small independent sole proprietor, maybe she works with a couple of other therapists, may not have strong banking relationships. So one of the reasons that the Democrats are holding off on replenishing that fund, and I do think that fund needs more money, and my hope is we'll get more money into it by early next week, that we want to make sure that rather than simply having it still all be first come, first serve, that we really take care of small businesses, sole proprietors, not-for-profits, minority businesses may not have the same kind of access to strong banking relationships with other businesses. So good program, we've got to make sure that it's getting to all the right people. And Meg, clearly, folks like you are folks that should apply. Charlotte from Covington is asking, why doesn't our military have mandatory coronavirus testing? Charlotte, that's a great question, and that's one of the questions why I believe the United States should have joined with other countries like Germany and South Korea and others and adopted the international testing standards back in January. I think we lost about 2 months when the administration didn't fully acknowledge the problem. I think there's been plenty of press validating that. Now, as we're trying to ramp up this production, I do know that we're both trying to replenish the national stockpiles, but I believe the military is getting access to some of this testing, but I think I owe you a better response on that. Let me try to get an answer that I'll post on my site afterwards on the status of military PPE equipment. Now, I was asking, what are we going to do to keep the president accountable? And Natalie, that is a great question. Obviously, when I agreed to work with the president on this bipartisan task force he set up, I said, one, I got to make sure that it's real. Two, that we get input. And three, that what he's doing is going to be held accountable, as I said, to data, science, medicine, reopening. On the question of the finances, I'm very concerned that the president has been firing inspector generals. He fired the inspector general in the intelligence community, an area where I'm the vice chairman. That concerns me, more particularly to the CARES package with literally trillions of dollars going out. When he got rid of who had been the inspector general from the Pentagon, who was supposed to be helping oversee this, is huge concern to me. There was also a special inspector general for this program. He has nominated someone. Concerned about that individual. He was somebody who's got, I think, potentially a background, but he has been on the White House staff, again, which appears to me to be a conflict of interest. We'll have to deal with that if we go through a hearing on his nomination. The most important thing we can keep the president accountable is in this legislation, there is a requirement that any business that gets money, anybody that gets a loan from the Federal Reserve, that we post that within 7 days. And I think Sunlight is going to have to be the best way we hold folks accountable. And that's going to be my job, candidly. For those of you who want to participate in that, we're going to need your eyeballs as well. E from Woodbridge says, now that we're in a pandemic and schools are closed until the end of the school year, what services are being provided for children who are food insecure? Well, that there is some good news. We were able, through the USDA and through actually some changes we got from the Secretary of Agriculture, most schools are offering those free and reduced lunches now to these kids in need. We were able to convince the Agriculture Secretary as well to get rid of the requirement that the child actually has to come to the school to pick up the breakfast and lunch. We shouldn't put that child in that kind of position. So I think we're making progress on this item. But let's face it, this is food insecurity, food deserts. Again, something I've been working on the last couple of years, but it is now wide open there. It is a disparity in income. It is unfortunately a disparity too often on race in our country, and we need to do more. One thing I've tried to urge people to do is, if you've got the financial wherewithal, I'd urge you all, please, to donate to your local food bank. Lisa and I, my wife and I, made some significant donations to all 7 of the regional food banks around Virginia. I was proud that our campaign was able to raise about $1,000 in a separate appeal. I think food banks are doing the work of God's work at this moment in time, and we ought to help and support them. One of the also things that we need to work on, and I've been talking to some of the people in the supply chain business, we've got plenty of food in our country, but what's happening is most of the food is now going to the grocery store. The grocery stores used to be the place to contribute to the food bank. The grocery stores are having that food all bought. So how do we get the food supply that used to go to the restaurants and get some of that food banks into other folks in need? One of the things that I'm very interested in is Jose Andreas, who folks perhaps in the greater Washington area might know more of, but a wonderful, wonderful guy who's got who does feeding programs all over the country and all around the world, is actually setting up a program called Chefs Across America, where chefs are creating feeding centers in the restaurants that are closed down all around the country. And that's another initiative that I've supported and would urge other folks to at least check out. Shirley is asking, when can citizens without symptoms be able to get tested and see if they're asymptomatic or had the virus and didn't know it? Shirley, great question. This is mostly going to rely upon when these antibody tests, serology is, I think, the more medical term, but I think in the common parlance they're called antibody tests. When they come out, some of those are supposed to be coming out literally FDA approval this week, and some of them have been talking about being able to ramp up 500,000 of these antibody tests a day. That would be great. We've got to make sure we get those tests out, but that's again where I would hope we ought to have a common site where you and I and everyone could go to say, all right, what tests are already out in the marketplace? How do I get them? What's about to come on? What are the testing protocols? If I'm asymptomatic, what do I do? And there's no common place to go. My hope is, again, that Johns Hopkins University, a site that I would trust, will come out with some information on that as soon as next week. Mercedes asked, what's going on with jails and prisons? And Mercedes, you're absolutely right. I have appealed and put out requests that I think that people who are in their last year of imprisonment, or folks that are kind of older, and in prison terms that's usually over 50, ought to be eligible for early release. We've seen some outbreaks of the virus in some jails. We've not had, to my knowledge, at least a dramatic upsurge in any of our Virginia jails, but I think it's more a question of time than if. And I would strongly urge that those folks that can be safely reintegrated into society, we do that. Let me see. One question was, if you owe child support, is it true that it's going to take that from the stimulus check? I don't know the answer to that. I will try to get that. I should know. I will try to get that answer and get it posted to you. I know that most fines or penalties that were posed against you would not apply, but if you owe child support, that one may apply. I just don't know. Will small businesses be able to be eligible for EIDL, the emergency loan, which is kind of quick cash in your hand? If you take that, are you also eligible for PPP? I don't know if you are, but I again will post that one. That is also a program that has EIDL that has run out of money, and frankly, that one helped a lot of really small businesses. And again, we want that program to be replenished. When the administration initially asked for more money, they didn't ask for more money for the EIDL program, which is supposed to turn around checks to you within like 36 or 72 hours. Oh, great question here. Andriana asked, what can be done for mortgages that are not government-backed? The answer on that is we have not been able to find a solution yet. We could give forbearance on federally guaranteed mortgages, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, FHA, VHA, but there are, as you're right, certain mortgages that don't have any federal attachment. Short term, I would urge you to, talk to your mortgage servicing company, and most of them are trying to cut some level of break. We're seeing if in the next package we can address that, as well as support for rent forbearance. It makes no good if you get rent forbearance and then say in September you start paying and you owe 4 months and it's all due at once. We need both on mortgages and on rent to make sure that you've got some time to get back up on your feet. There's a good question there. Nicole said, my understanding is all of them PPP money has been allocated. It will be replenished. I know it will be replenished for another somewhere between 150 to 250 billion. All a number of us are saying, and a number of my Republican colleagues have agreed now, is before we simply replenish this on a first come, first served basis, let's make sure that small businesses, minority owned businesses, individual, nonprofits, folks that may not have a strong banking relationship get part of that money, number one. And number two, that the emergency income distress loans, the EIDL program, that gets replenished as well, because that has also been very beneficial to the really small businesses. My hope would be that will be replenished, and we'll find some agreement on that early next week. And again, I think those funds will come, but we want to make sure it gets to everyone who is, as much as possible, in a fair way, not simply first come, first serve. Is it true that one? No. This Onyx has asked, do you not receive the federal stimulus, $600, or the additional the federal stimulus, the $1,200, $600 in UI if you didn't file 2018 tax returns? No, that is not the case. They have your actual tax number, even if you didn't file in 2018, and they should be able to get that to you. You can also contact my office, and if we can see if we can help a little bit on that as well. Here's a great question. Rachel, that I don't believe the question is, are you able to collect unemployment if you're also trying to get the PPP loan/grant? You can't double dip. If you're getting unemployment, you can't also be eligible for the payroll reimbursement from the PPP plan. Um, uh, no double dipping there, but it is making, and that was the way it was set up. I am working on a new initiative, actually, that will be announced tomorrow, that might be a broader program, because one of the concerns I have on the PPP program is it's great for if you work for a company that's under 500 people or a nonprofit under 500, but if you work for a firm got 700 folks, how does that firm stay alive? How do you benefit? And I'm going to have some more to say on that tomorrow. Kathy, who is a fifth grade teacher, and her husband's a social worker in Henrico. And Kathy, one, thank you for what you both do, and your social worker husband's probably got to be pretty busy these days. Clearly, one of the things that is also in great need right now is support for state and local government. State government, local government doesn't have the benefit of the federal government. They can't just print more money. They got to make their budgets balance. And just as we've seen business revenue go down, local government revenue has gone down as people aren't, and state revenue has gone down. People aren't buying as much stuff, not as much sales tax. People are deferring some of their taxes. So we have said, this goes back to the PPP program, replenish the program for small business, but we also want to put some more money in right away for state and local government and for hospitals, because unfortunately there could be local government layoffs, I believe, within the next case in Virginia if we don't get some more resources down. And I also know from many of our hospitals who have gotten rid of their elective surgeries where they make money, waiting for the COVID virus to come. And candidly, I'm not sure many people are going to, even if they didn't get rid of elective surgeries, are going to want to go to the hospital, have to at this moment in time. So they're in a really hard up as well. So we need to get some additional resources there as well. Yes, Joey asked, will independent contractors get the $600 for unemployment and you've been out of work for weeks? Yes, and it should be retroactive. This is a problem, though, where we've had that, and I've been pounding on the Department of Labor to get us firm guidance on this, because each state unemployment insurance is usually run state by state, and trying to get all of these 50 set up is kind of a mess. And I've been strongly urging DOL to come out with across the board guidance, and I'm going to be on a call with the governor this afternoon, and I'll try to get an update and then again post. But yes, Joey, you should be eligible for all of those. Wow. Diana asks a question. She says she is a mental health professional and most of her clients are African Americans, and the insurance companies are denying mental health skill building at a time. That's just wrong. Diana, you ought to contact our office. Let's see if we can shake some things up there. That's, if there is people being discriminated against now, particularly when we've seen a disproportionate number of African Americans unfortunately falling victim to this virus, that's just wrong, and it needs to stop. I got Nancy from Chesapeake is saying go Coast Guard, and yes, I hope to get down to the Coast Guard station. That was supposed to be on a trip in March, but also we are working our tail off on making sure we get all the PPE to the VA. Here is part of the challenge. The VA has PPE, but I believe they're still trying to adhere to the CDC guidelines. And the CDC guidelines on usage of PPE in a medical facility, frankly, I think needs to be updated. And we are real-time working on this. So we're working on both getting more PPE to the VAs. We're also trying to urge them to show a little more flexibility on the equipment. Again, we know where they need to hold things in reserve, but again, let's do this and lean in. We've got a lot of workers at the VA. We've got a number of folks who've gotten sick down in Hampton, One thing that VA has done, I've talked to the administrator about, is they have provided a hotel space. So if folks, medical professionals and others, technicians and others, are working and they don't want to go home and potentially expose their families, they will be put up in a hotel for free. So I think that's that's a step in the right direction. Let's see here. Yeah, Tim and Lynn asked, I think probably responding to my comment that on the PPP program, the small business program, there was this constant tension about you want to get the money out quickly. You don't want to have to, what's called underwriting. The banks have to do too much research about each of the businesses. But what the business simply had to say was, I think I'm going to see economic harm. Unfortunately, I know folks who, money management firms have not shown any harm at all, maybe more busy, but they're getting some money. So I am very concerned about making sure that we don't have this kind of abuse. There is fraud provisions if you sign something and you have to attest to that. But I would love to have seen something that would have said, you got to show at least a 20% revenue decline. When we've got restaurants, businesses, barbershops, I think about our massage therapist friend earlier, chances are they've got 80, 90, 100% decline in revenues. And it just doesn't seem fair to me that they may not be getting funding, and some of these other businesses who may not have seen as much duress are getting that kind of funding. Deborah is asking, OSHA has a 19 workplace test as a cosmetologist. Deborah, I'm going to look into that OSHA cosmetologist workplace test, and that might be good, as she has suggested, might be good for nail salons and other places that intersect with a lot of the public, particularly as we move, hopefully at some point, towards getting back to work. Melanie, we're worried about voting this fall. How can we get going on voting on mail or virtual voting? Well, Melanie, on this one, I strongly support the effort to move us, like certain of our West Coast states, like California, not so much California, but Oregon, Washington State, Colorado, Utah, very red state, have got mail-in balloting, no voter fraud. So I support that legislation at the federal level. Truthfully, I'm not sure we're going to get it all in. The good news is here in Virginia, we have made dramatic improvements. We've got no excuse absentee balloting. We've got the ability to ballot. Polls will be open certain polls will be open 20 days ahead. So I think we are getting better at the federal level. I think our challenge is going to be the White House and Senator McConnell have strongly opposed this. So additional funding, whether we get the full voting by mail, I think is an open question. And there are a number of communities, particularly from the civil rights community, that want to maintain, in-place voting as well. So try to balance that out. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is, nowhere in America should we have to repeat the scenes of what we saw in Wisconsin, where people had to choose exercising their rights versus the chances of getting sick. The good news is, at least I say this as a Democrat, the Democrats turned out in record numbers in Wisconsin, and the Supreme Judge there that I think the Republican legislature was trying to protect actually got defeated. So there is a little bit of justice still going on. Okay, William is saying that Mecklenburg Senior Citizens in South Hill has an operating food bank for those in that area. In Mecklenburg counties that actually had a spike, a rural county had a spike in their COVID cases. And William, I also saw that food bank in South Hill, right near the farmers market. I think it is world class, and I think it is. You all ought to be very, very proud of that facility. Okay. Jennifer says, what role can Congress take in pressuring banks to improve, streamline, expedite? Yes. Jennifer, truth is on this, I think the banks think they have expedited. If we think about normally, the SBA does about 220 loans in Virginia. I don't have the Virginia specific numbers, but I know nationwide we've had already 1.6 million of these PPP. I'm not sure how many of the EIDL loans. I'm on a regular conversation with the community banks, the Virginia bankers. We're also trying to make the community development financial institutions that have a little more progressive leanings. They can participate as well. You may, Jennifer, want to contact my office and maybe we can, at least ping. You shouldn't have to wait for 3 weeks to get a response on a program that's supposed to give you a response in 3 days. I 100% agree. Thanks for your leadership. Congress plan for oversight funding. Can you speak on Congress plan for oversight of CARES funding giving you? Rod asked about oversight again. We put in oversight in terms of a special inspector general. I think at the end of the day, Rod, the most important oversight, and this was not in TARP, by the way, but we're making sure that every company that gets federal money, anybody that the Federal Reserve lends to, that's supposed to be posted within 7 days. Now, at the beginning, it may take a couple extra days to get that up and running, but we've got that in the legislation. And as I think I reported in my last Facebook town hall, I've been negotiating a lot with the Treasury Secretary. And as I said, I don't normally agree with this administration on many things, but I think Secretary Mnuchin has been a straight shooter, and I think he understands the need that we have, real good transparency on this issue. Because when we're talking about literally upwards of $6 trillion of your money and mine, taxpayer money, going out, we need to make sure that it's going to people in need. Terrence asked, could you please speak on Trump's withdrawal of support for the WHO? I cannot believe the president took this action. I think it is the wrong action to take. I agree. I'd like to find out why WHO didn't put more pressure on China early on. I do think the Chinese government was trying to hide things, but the WHO, was somebody that was talking about the challenges of this virus early on. And I think when we lose these international organizations, and when we look at this virus, if I don't care whether it's been any prior president, Obama, Bush, Clinton, the previous Bush, you name it, Reagan, when there was a crisis like this, the world looks to America for leadership. We saw it after the 2008 crisis. We saw it after 9/11. We saw it with Ebola, H1N1. And not only is this president not led, but then to turn away an organization that's not perfect, WHO is not perfect, I think is a huge mistake. And I can tell you, Congress, I at least as a member of Congress, will try to do all we can to restore that funding and that support. Okay, Jim, thank you for correcting me. I said earlier that I didn't think you could do PPP and EIDL, but thank you so much. SBA indicates that you can have a PPP loan/grant and EIDL, but only one of each, and they cannot be used for the same thing. So generally speaking, you get the EIDL, the fast money that's supposed to come in 3 to 5 days, but as we heard from one of my earlier commenters, isn't coming out in 3 to 5 days. That's supposed to be the emergency quick fix it to keep your business open. And then the PPP is supposed to run for 8 weeks after the program comes in place. But Jim, thank you so much for correcting me. Yes, Melanie, please remind everyone to store your guns safely during this time. Amen to that, with family and kids and everybody around. We all have Second Amendment rights, but please, please, please store those guns in a safe place during this time when we've got so many family members around, and candidly, when the level of pressure on all of us is up dramatically. Yes, Charlotte is asking, is testing going to be mandatory for the military who are further forward deployed? Charlotte, I'll get the answer to that, but I gotta believe absolutely. After the tragedy of what happened on our aircraft carrier Teddy Roosevelt, and I personally believe Captain Crozier should be reinstated. But after that tragedy, if we don't make sure that sailors, soldiers, Marines that are being deployed, um, they all need testing, and I got to believe we will get that done. But I will again try to make sure we get you an answer on that. Okay, Melissa, here's a timely question. Is there going to be any relief for college seniors who are graduating and didn't get the stimulus payments, the $1,200, because their tax status as a dependent in 2019, but they're now out on their own in 2020? Melissa, you're not the first person to ask this question. It was not addressed in the CARES package. I want to make sure it gets addressed next. You guys are caught right in the middle. And there's also the question of even the checks that went out for dependents ended with kids who are 16. So what happens for that kid who's 18 or 19, may still even be in high schools, may still be home, or maybe doing a community college, but still living at home? Why only $500? So that's a challenge. Okay, Selena says, okay, my boss says we can't collect unemployment because she's applying for PPP. She was rejected 4 times. Selena, I would go ahead and put your application in for unemployment, and notify your employer, and then figure out a way to we can this has not got to be the first time this has happened. There is going to be some intersection here, and there can be some kind of repayment plan here. But I can understand if you're out there unemployed with not the funds to get by, I would recommend going ahead and applying for the unemployment. Marty just asked, and Marty, I know you. It's great to hear from you. I haven't heard from you for a while. We need to build our testing infrastructure. I 100% agree with you. And that's why, Marty, I've been so frustrated that there's not been a single source of federal information about this. And what got me hot on this was I looked at how many different sources we had in Virginia, and then saw UVA ramping up, and then some of the private labs have got unused capacity at this point. We just need to have, in a sense, a spreadsheet. Again, I was a business guy longer than I've been a politician. You got to start with good data. And I tried for a while with the federal government, banged my head against the wall. But then I think Johns Hopkins is going to provide this, as I may have mentioned earlier. Talk to Larry Hogan, the Republican governor from Maryland. I'm urging the National Governors Association to work on this kind of initiative and try to get these information to the Johns Hopkins so that we can have this kind of trusted site, so at least we know what capacity, so we can then talk about how to build it out. I know we're running out of time now. I want to thank you all for participating. If you didn't get a specific question answered, we'll try to get back to you. Some of those that I've called out, I want to make sure my staff follows up on. Some of this I know will come more on the official side rather than the campaign side. To me, it's all about trying to help folks get answers at this point. Let me just close with kind of a personal request, and that is that I, from the tenor of these comments, I know this is a hard time for us, and I'm very fortunate. I got my family safe. I was blessed to have some financial wherewithal before I got into this, so I'm not feeling the same stress, except indirectly, that all you are. I would urge, though, whether you're stressed or not, to kind of see if you can reach out to somebody in your community of friends or family. Probably is pretty stressed at this point, probably feeling pretty lonely. And I would appeal to you as a Virginian, as an American, to reach out and tell somebody you may not have been in contact, that you care about them. I think we're going to all need to show each other a little bit of grace through this period. I think we maybe ought to try to find a little more where we can agree on as opposed to disagree on. I took that in mind when I decided to join President Trump on hopefully his good faith effort on this committee he's asked me to serve on. I know we're going to get through this. The next 10 or 12 days will probably be the most challenging as we try to get the kinks out of some of this relief, and as some of this laying off of folks begins to stabilize. We will get through. We're going to get through because we live in the greatest country in the world, and we're going to maintain that greatest country status, ensure our elections continue to be free and open, and we all get a chance to participate. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be happy to try to do this on a regular basis. And again, everybody stay safe. Thank you all so much.